Victor Hale set the envelope on the kitchen table without a word. Inside it, a photograph. Evelyn Harper, taken through a long lens, standing at the bus stop 2 blocks from the Valenti mansion at 6:47 in the morning. She was holding a coffee cup she'd bought herself because she never touched the kitchen stores without permission. Her coat had a fraying hem. She didn't know anyone was watching. On the back of the photograph, 4 words in black marker. She knows too much. Victor had slid it across to Dominic Valenti like it was a quarterly report. Casual. Almost bored. As if the woman's life were a line item he was recommending they cut. Dominic didn't pick it up. He looked at it for a long time, sitting very still in the chair that had been his father's chair, at the table where his father had once signed papers that moved millions and ended careers and occasionally ended men. His hands were flat on the wood. His face was unreadable in the way that had taken him years to learn. Not peace. Nothing like peace. Just the practiced blankness of a man who had learned that showing anything in this room was dangerous. "Where did you get this?" he said. Not a question. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Victor shrugged. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, the kind of man who wore pocket squares at 8 in the morning. He had managed the Valenti family's financial operations for 19 years. He had been at the hospital when Dominic's father died. He had held 17-year-old Dominic's shoulder in the hallway outside the ICU and told him, "You're the man of this family now, son." Dominic had believed him. For 19 years he had believed him. "She's been in this house for 2 years, Victor said. She has eyes, she has ears, and lately she's been asking questions. She hasn't asked me a single question. That you know of." Dominic finally looked up from the photograph. "What are you suggesting, Victor?" "I'm suggesting," Victor said, smoothing his jacket, "that loose ends have a way of becoming problems. Your father understood that." The room went quiet. Outside, the April rain hit the windows in long, diagonal sheets. Somewhere deep in the mansion, a clock ticked. Dominic picked up the photograph. He looked at it. Evelyn at the bus stop, her coat fraying, her coffee cup tilting slightly to the left the way it always did because she held things with her right hand and checked her phone with her left. And something moved through his chest that he would not have been able to name if someone had asked him to. He set the photograph face down on the table. "Get out," he said quietly. "Dominic, get out of my house, Victor. If you found this story, don't leave yet. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because I promise you, this is only where it begins." The Valenti mansion sat on the northwestern edge of Chicago's Gold Coast, like a man who had outgrown his neighborhood but refused to leave. 7,000 square feet of limestone and leaded glass, built in 1923 by a man who made his first fortune in cement and his second in things that didn't get written into wills. The grounds were immaculate. The staff was quiet. The kitchen, where most of them spent the majority of their working hours, smelled permanently of old wood and coffee and the particular kind of silence that lives in houses where too much has happened to be spoken about openly. Evelyn Harper had worked there for 26 months. She'd gotten the position through a placement agency, the kind that didn't ask too many questions about employment gaps if your references checked out and you showed up to the interview with clean shoes and a willingness to sign a confidentiality agreement. Evelyn had done all 3. She needed the money. Not in the abstract way people say they need money, but in the concrete, specific way that meant her brother Marcus's tuition payment was due on the 14th of every month, and her own textbooks for the evening nursing program at community college cost more than she'd budgeted, and the alternative to this job was moving back to the apartment above her aunt's garage in Evanston and starting over in a way she was not ready to do. She was 31 years old. She had already started over once. Once had been enough. Her room was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a hallway that got cold in winter because the radiator on that end of the building was original to the house and no one had seen fit to replace it. It was small. There was a single window that looked out over the service alley, a bed, a wooden desk where she studied, and a shelf above the desk where she kept her nursing textbooks in the order she was working through them. She had a photograph of her father on the desk. He was smiling in it, caught off guard at some family gathering, holding a paper plate with a piece of cake on it. She'd taken the photo herself when she was 19, and he'd said, "Stop pointing that thing at me, Evie," and she'd taken it anyway. He died 4 years later. A work accident, the company had said. Injuries sustained on the job. The settlement had been less than anyone expected and had arrived finally after 18 months of paperwork and a lawyer who charged more than the settlement was worth. She tried not to think about it on workdays. On workdays, she made the beds, managed the kitchen inventory, coordinated with the cook, kept the household accounts in the notebook the previous housekeeper had left behind, and moved through the mansion's rooms with the particular careful invisibility that the job required. She was good at it. She was good at moving through spaces without disturbing them, at noticing what needed doing without being told, at being present without being seen. She was also good at noticing when something was wrong. It was the photograph that did it, in the end. Not the one Victor had taken of her. She didn't know about that yet. It was a different photograph. A family photograph that had hung on the second-floor landing for as long as she'd worked in the house. A formal portrait of the Valenti family, taken sometime in the early 2000s. Father, mother, a teenage boy who must have been Dominic, a younger girl who must have been his sister Kara. The father was handsome in a heavy-jawed way, the kind of handsome that photographs well, but probably intimidated people in person. The mother looked tired. Dominic, at maybe 15, looked like he was somewhere else entirely in his head. On a Tuesday morning in early April, Evelyn came up the stairs with fresh linens and the photograph was gone. Not fallen. Not moved. The nail was still in the wall. The small rectangular shadow where the frame had hung for years was still visible in the slightly faded wallpaper. The picture hook was empty. She stood there for a moment, holding the linens. Then she went on with her morning. Dominic Valenti ran Valenti Freight Solutions from an office on the 42nd floor of a building in the Loop that he owned outright and had renovated twice. On paper, VFS was one of the Midwest's largest privately held logistics companies, moving medical supplies, industrial equipment, and consumer goods through a network of warehouses, distribution hubs, and long-haul carriers across 12 states. It employed 400 people. It had contracts with 3 major hospital systems and 2 state government agencies. Its financials were clean, audited annually, reviewed quarterly, structured with the kind of institutional precision that said, "Look at us, we have nothing to hide," which was precisely the point. The other operations, the ones that moved through the warehouse network at night, that used the same drivers and the same trucks, but carried different manifests, that generated cash through channels that never appeared on any quarterly report. Those had a different name. They didn't have an org chart. They had a structure that had been built over 60 years by 3 generations of Valenti men, and it ran on loyalty and fear in the particular combination that Dominic's grandfather had perfected and his father had refined, and Dominic himself had inherited at the age of 17 without being asked whether he wanted it. He had not wanted it. He had wanted to be a surgeon. This was not something he told people. He had told his mother once, when he was 14, and she had looked at him with an expression he hadn't understood at the time. Something complicated, something sad, and said, "You're so much like him, you know that?" Meaning his father, which he had taken as a compliment, and which he understood now was something else entirely. He had told his college roommate, briefly, during a late night in their first semester, and the roommate had laughed in the way people laugh when they think you're being self-deprecating and said, "Yeah, right, Valenti the surgeon." He had never mentioned it to anyone again. At 39, he ran a freight company and a criminal organization and a house with 7 staff members and a collection of suits that had been made for him by a tailor in Milan, and wore all of it like a man wearing a costume he'd put on so long ago he'd forgotten what his own face looked like underneath. He was very, very good at his job. He was almost never alone. Which was why, on the 107th night, though he wasn't counting then, didn't know he was counting, didn't understand yet what the number meant. When the rain came down hard enough to rattle the 3rd-floor windows, and the clock in the hall said 2 in the morning, and every reasonable person in the house was asleep, Dominic found himself standing outside a door at the end of the cold hallway, with his hand raised to knock, and no clear explanation for what he was doing there. He was soaked. He'd walked in from the garage without stopping, coat still wet, shoes leaving damp footprints on the runner. He'd been at a meeting that wasn't in his calendar, with men whose names weren't in any system, where he'd been asked to sign off on a decision that he understood was wrong in a way he couldn't articulate precisely because the language for articulating it didn't exist in the world he operated in. The language for "this is wrong" was not part of the vocabulary of the thing he'd inherited. The vocabulary was necessary and unavoidable, and you think your father wanted this either. He stood at Evelyn Harper's door. He had spoken to her directly exactly 23 times in 26 months. He knew this the way you know things you haven't meant to track. He knew her schedule. He knew that she studied from 10 to midnight on weeknights and didn't study on Sundays. He knew that she'd grown up in Bridgeport, that her father had died when she was 23, that she had a younger brother she talked about with the particular careful pride of someone who had sacrificed something to make another person's life possible. He knew she held her coffee cup tilted left. He knew that when she found something in the house that was broken or wrong, she fixed it quietly without making a report, and if it was beyond her capacity to fix, she left a precise handwritten note on his desk with the problem stated clearly and 3 options for addressing it ranked by cost. She did not ask questions. She did not presume. She moved through his house like someone who understood that spaces had their own dignity and that her job was to maintain it, not impose on it. He had watched her for 107 nights. He knocked. The sound was quiet enough that she might have slept through it. 4 knocks, evenly spaced, with a pause between the second and third that sounded like hesitation. Evelyn had been awake. She'd been lying in the dark with her nursing textbook face down on her chest. She'd fallen asleep reading and woken up again 20 minutes later with the light still on. And when the knock came, she sat up so fast the textbook fell to the floor. She looked at the door. It was 2 in the morning. In 26 months, no one had knocked on her door after 10 o'clock. The rules of the house were unspoken but clear. The staff's third-floor quarters were their own. Whatever happened in the rest of the mansion stayed in the rest of the mansion. She picked up her robe from the chair beside the bed, tied it, stood there for a moment with her hand not quite reaching the knob. She opened the door. He was standing in the hallway in a charcoal suit that was dark with rain across the shoulders, his hair wet, a cut on his lower lip that was fresh enough to still be seeping slightly. He was holding his own right hand with his left, the way you do when something hurts and you're trying to hide it from yourself. His face, which was normally arranged into an expression she would have described as controlled, looked like someone had taken that control and simply removed it, the way you strip a gear, and what was underneath was just a man, tired, wet, standing in a hallway at 2 in the morning with nowhere else to go. She had never seen him look like this. In 26 months, she had never seen him look like a person. "Mr. Valenti," she said. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes went to the textbook on the floor behind her, the light on, the robe she'd grabbed in a hurry. She watched him register all of it and do nothing with it. "I don't know why I'm standing here," he said. His voice was different, lower. The professional precision he used in his normal speech was gone. He sounded like someone reading aloud from a language they'd learned but never spoken in public. "Okay," she said. She was aware this wasn't a sufficient response. She couldn't find a better one. He looked at his own feet, then back at her. "Do you ever feel like you've been living someone else's life for so long that you've forgotten what yours would have looked like?" The question landed in the hallway between them and sat there. Evelyn thought about her father's photograph on her desk. She thought about the nursing program she'd started 3 times and stopped twice. She thought about the morning 6 years ago when she'd walked out of the hospital where she'd been doing her clinical hours and sat down on a bench outside and just stopped. Could not make herself go back in, not because she didn't love it, because loving it while everything else was falling apart had become an unbearable weight. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The hallway was cold. The radiator at the far end ticked once, metallic and useless. "I'm sorry," he said. This wasn't." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I shouldn't have knocked." He was turning to leave when she said, "There's coffee downstairs if you want." He stopped. "The good kind," she added, because her voice needed somewhere to go. "Not the machine stuff. I brought my own beans." He turned back. His expression had changed, not softened exactly, but shifted, the way a room shifts when someone opens a window, just slightly, just enough to change the quality of the air. "Okay," he said. "Go on." The kitchen at 2 in the morning was a different room than the kitchen during the day. During the day, it was a working space. The cook, the deliveries, the institutional hum of a household running on schedule. At 2 in the morning, it was just a room with old wooden counters and the smell of the day's cooking still faintly in the air, and a window above the sink that showed the dark yard and the rain coming down. Evelyn made coffee. She was aware of him sitting at the kitchen table behind her, not watching her exactly, or maybe watching her. She couldn't tell and wasn't going to turn around to check. She ground the beans the way her father had taught her, by hand, the old way, because the sound of the grinder calmed her, and she needed something to be calm right now. She set a mug in front of him and sat down across the table with her own. The cut on his lip had stopped bleeding. His hands were around the mug. She could see now that the right hand was bruised across the knuckles, fresh bruising, the kind that comes from impact with something that didn't yield. She did not ask about the hand. He looked into the coffee. "How long have you been studying nursing?" She almost said a long time, which was her usual answer to questions about her nursing program, deflecting, keeping it general. Something about the hour made her answer differently. "I started when I was 22, she said. "Got through 2 years of it. Then my dad died and Marcus was 14 and I needed money that was reliable and I couldn't finish the program and do the clinical hours and work enough hours to cover everything at the same time. So I stopped." She held her mug. "I started again 4 years later. Got through 1 semester. Had to stop again." She paused. "This time I'm finishing it." "What makes this time different?" It was such a direct question that it surprised her. Nobody asked that. People heard the story and said good for you, or that must have been hard, and moved on. "Marcus starts his last year of college in the fall," she said. "After that, his loans are his, and I've been saving." She looked at the table. "And I'm 31. I don't have another stop in me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I was supposed to be a surgeon." She looked up. His face said that he hadn't meant to say it. He was looking at his coffee with the expression of someone who has just heard themselves say something out loud that had only ever lived inside their head. A small muscle in his jaw moved. "What happened?" she asked. He set the mug down. "My father was killed. I was 17. He said it simply, without performance, in the tone of someone describing weather. "There was no one else. My mother couldn't. She wasn't able to. My sister was 12. He turned the mug slightly in his hands. So. The single syllable carried the weight of 22 years of choices that weren't really choices, of a life built inside the wreckage of another life's plans. Evelyn thought of her own so. The list of things she'd wanted that she'd quietly set aside one by one with that same flat word. So. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make it smaller." He looked at her then. Actually looked at her, the way people mostly don't. The way that has nothing to do with being polite or professional and everything to do with actually seeing the person in front of you. She didn't look away. It felt important not to look away. Outside, the rain hit the window. The kitchen clock counted the seconds. "I can't do this anymore," he said. It came out quiet, almost bewildered, like he was noticing it for the first time. "I don't—" He stopped. "There are things I've done because they were what was done, because the organization expected them, because the alternative was—" He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth, the bruised hand. "I sat in a room tonight and I looked at the men across the table from me and I thought, my father sat in this same room with these same men making these same decisions, and it killed him. And I am still here." He looked down. "And I'm so goddamn tired." Evelyn didn't say anything for a moment. She let the words sit where he'd put them, in the kitchen, in the quiet, in the 2 o'clock dark. She understood, without knowing the specifics, without knowing what room or what men or what decision, that she was hearing something real. The kind of real that doesn't get said out loud. The kind that lives so deep in a person that by the time it surfaces, something has already broken. "What would you have been?" she asked. "As a surgeon. What kind?" He blinked. The question clearly surprised him. "Cardiac," he said, after a pause. "I was good at anatomy. I was—" He stopped again, and this time what moved across his face wasn't pain exactly, but something more like grief, the specific grief of a talent you were never allowed to use. "I was 17. I don't know if I would have been any good." "You were good enough to know what you wanted to do." "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "But it's something." He picked up his mug, drank, set it down. He looked at the window and at the rain and at the dark yard, and his expression did something complicated that she didn't try to read. "Why are you being kind to me?" he said. Not unkindly, genuinely asking. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know exactly," she said. "You knocked on my door at 2 in the morning, and you looked like someone who needed to sit in a kitchen for a while." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. It didn't quite get there, but it was closer than she'd expected. "That's an accurate description," he said. They sat there for another 40 minutes. They didn't talk much. The rain slowed. The clock moved. At some point, Evelyn refilled both mugs without being asked, and he didn't thank her, and she didn't wait for him to. It was just a thing that happened, a small, ordinary courtesy in a room that had seen very few ordinary things. When he finally stood to go, he picked up his mug and carried it to the sink, rinsed it, set it on the drying rack. She noticed that. At the kitchen door, he paused. "Harper," he said. "Yes." "The photograph from the landing, the family one." She waited. "I moved it," he said. You don't need to note it anywhere. He stopped. "I couldn't look at my father's face right now." "Okay," she said. He nodded once, the smallest possible acknowledgement, and walked back into the dark house. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, long enough for the rain to stop entirely, long enough for the first pale suggestion of morning to begin at the edges of the window above the sink. Her coffee went cold. She didn't notice. She was thinking about a man standing in a hallway at 2 in the morning with nowhere else to go. She was thinking about So. She was thinking about the way he'd rinsed his own mug and set it on the rack like someone who remembered, somewhere in the muscle memory of his hands, what it was to be a person who cleaned up after himself. She was thinking about the cut on his lip and the bruised knuckles and the 19 people who probably worked for him who were paid, in part, to make sure he never had to think about such things. She was thinking about how strange it was that in 26 months she had seen him in this house 100 times, had spoken to him 23 times, had moved through his rooms and managed his household accounts, and kept his spaces in order. And this was the first time she had any sense at all of who he actually was. Or wasn't. Or had been, once, a long time ago, before everything. She picked up her textbook from where it had fallen on the floor, carried it upstairs, set it on the desk beside her father's photograph, lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling, did not sleep. 4 days later, a man named Victor Hale stopped her in the second-floor hallway. She'd seen him before. He came to the house occasionally, always in a suit, always with the slightly excessive confidence of a person who wants you to know they have access without having to say it. She'd noted him the way she noted everything, quietly, without comment, filed away. "Ms. Harper," he said. "Mr. Hale." He smiled. It was a good smile, professionally assembled, the kind that got used in negotiations. "How are you finding things here? Everything to your satisfaction?" "Yes, thank you." "Good. Good." He adjusted his pocket square. "Mr. Valenti speaks very highly of your work." She said nothing. This seemed like the right response. "He's a complicated man to work for, I imagine." Still nothing. Hale tilted his head slightly. "You're very discreet." "It's part of the job." "Of course." He smiled again. "Of course it is." He started to move past her, then paused. "One thing. If you ever notice anything unusual in the house, anything that seems out of place," he met her eyes, "I hope you'd feel comfortable bringing it to me, before anyone else." Evelyn looked at him. "I report to Mr. Valenti," she said. "If I notice anything, I'll bring it to him directly." Something moved through Hale's expression. Not the smile. The smile stayed. Something beneath it, in the eyes, in the small muscle at the corner of his jaw. "Of course," he said. "Naturally." He moved on down the hallway. Evelyn stood where she was for a moment after he'd gone. Then she went to the wastebasket in the second-floor office, the one she emptied every morning without exception, and looked inside. It had already been emptied. She hadn't emptied it. She stood there looking at the empty basket and thought about the photograph gone from the wall. About the filing cabinet she'd passed that morning with the lock hanging open in a way it had never been before. About Victor Hale's professionally assembled smile and the thing behind his eyes. She thought about 4 words in a kitchen at 2 in the morning. "I can't do this anymore." She didn't know yet what any of it meant. She only knew, with the same certainty she'd learned to trust in the years since her father died. The certainty that came from paying attention when everyone else was looking at something else. That something was very wrong in this house, and that it had been wrong for a long time before she arrived. The filing cabinet was locked again by Thursday morning. Evelyn noticed it at 7:14 a.m., passing the second-floor office with a stack of fresh linens, and she noticed it the way she'd noticed the other things. Not with alarm, not with the kind of sharp attention that announces itself, but with the quiet peripheral awareness she'd spent years developing, the kind her father used to call paying the right kind of attention. He'd meant it about people. She'd learned it applied to rooms. The cabinet had been left open Tuesday. It was locked Thursday. Nothing in between explained that. Not cleaning, not routine, not any order she'd been given. Locks on filing cabinets didn't engage themselves. Someone had come back for it. She kept walking, delivered the linens, made no note, but she thought about it. Dominic was in the city by 6 every morning and rarely back before 7 at night. The days after the kitchen, she'd started thinking of it that way, the kitchen, as if the room had become an event. He returned to the house looking exactly as he always had. Coat pressed, face closed, the controlled blankness back in place like he'd picked it up on the way in the door. He didn't acknowledge what had happened in any way she could detect. He didn't avoid her either. He simply moved through the house the way he always had, and she moved through it the way she always had. And the kitchen at 2 in the morning existed in some separate pocket of time that neither of them seemed to know how to address in daylight. She didn't expect him to. She didn't want him to. Whatever that night had been, it was his to carry and hers to hold, and neither of them owed the other an explanation for it. She did, however, start paying the right kind of attention to the filing cabinet, the wastebasket, and Victor Hale. Hale came back on Friday. He arrived at 10 a.m. with a leather briefcase and the easy proprietary movement of a man who understood that his access to this house was not technically unlimited, but practically so, and no one in it was going to challenge him on the distinction. He went straight to the second-floor office. He was there for an hour and 40 minutes. When he left, he carried the briefcase differently, heavier, or held at a different angle, or both. Evelyn was running a cloth along the banister when he came down the stairs. She didn't look up. He didn't slow. At the bottom, he paused and said without turning, "Good morning, Ms. Harper," in the tone of a man who is leaving a message for someone who isn't in the room. "Good morning," she said. He left. She stood there holding the cloth. Then she went upstairs, walked to the office door, and looked at the filing cabinet. Locked. The little amber lock indicator on the keypad was lit solid, not blinking. In the years she'd worked in this house, she had never seen Dominic carry files out in a briefcase. He had a driver who transported documents. He had a courier service for sensitive materials. There was a protocol. There was always a protocol. Victor Hale had just walked out of this house carrying something that wasn't his. She was almost certain. She went back to the banister, finished cleaning it, made no note. She was thinking. The conversation happened on a Sunday. Dominic was in the library. Not working, just sitting, which was unusual enough that she stopped in the doorway when she saw him. He was in the chair by the window with a book open in his lap that he clearly wasn't reading, looking at the yard below where the April sun had finally made a genuine appearance for the first time in weeks. He looked like a man who had been sitting with a problem long enough that he and the problem had started to resemble each other. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Evelyn said. "You're not interrupting." She'd come to ask about the household budget for the week. A routine question, the kind she handled without bothering him 95% of the time. She asked it. He answered it. She wrote down what he said. She was turning to go when he said, "Have you had any visitors lately?" She stopped, turned back. "In the house, I mean," he said. His eyes were still on the yard. "Anyone speaking to you, beyond the usual?" She looked at him for a moment. His profile was very still. He was asking carefully, which meant he already knew the answer or suspected it, which meant he was checking whether she'd tell him the truth. "Victor Hale stopped me in the hallway on Tuesday," she said. "He asked if I'd noticed anything unusual in the house. He suggested I bring it to him before anyone else." Dominic didn't move. Not a muscle. Not a flicker. "What did you say?" he asked. "I told him I report to you." Now he turned, just slightly, enough to see her face. "And have you? Noticed anything unusual?" She held the budget notebook in both hands. Outside the window, a bird landed on the stone ledge and immediately left. The family photograph on the landing was moved. The wastebasket in the office was emptied on a day I didn't empty it. The filing cabinet was left open Tuesday and locked again Thursday morning. She paused. And this Friday, Mr. Hale left with a briefcase he arrived with empty. The silence that followed was the longest he'd given anything she'd said since the kitchen. "How do you know it was empty when he arrived?" he asked. "I watched him carry it in from the foyer. It moved freely. When he left, he held it close to his body and used his shoulder to open the door instead of his free hand." Dominic looked at her. She looked back. "Sit down, Harper," he said. His voice was very even. Not cold, even. There was a difference she was learning. She sat. He didn't tell her everything that Sunday. What he told her came out in pieces, the way things come out when someone is deciding, in real time, how much truth they can afford to release into the air without it becoming something they can't take back. He told her the freight company had concerns about internal financial discrepancies. He told her Victor Hale had been with the organization for 19 years. He told her that people in positions of long-term trust were sometimes the last ones anyone thought to look at. He did not tell her what the organization actually was. She already knew, or knew enough. You didn't work 2 years in a house like this, paying the right kind of attention, without understanding that the freight company was not the whole story. The late-night phone calls that happened in rooms with closed doors. The men who came to the back entrance instead of the front. The particular way certain conversations stopped when she entered a room. Not the way conversations stop when an employee enters, but the way they stop when the wrong person might hear something that can't be unheard. She hadn't asked because asking wasn't her job, and because the answer would have required her to do something about it, and she hadn't been ready for that. She wasn't sure she was ready now. But she was in the chair. She'd sat down. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked at her sharply, like that wasn't what he'd expected. "Nothing," he said. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to stop. To not act on what you've noticed. Not yet. Let me handle it. Okay? And I'm asking you to tell me," he said, slower, "if Hale or anyone else in his position approaches you again. Directly. Come to me." "All right," he nodded. The book was still open in his lap. He looked down at it, then set it aside on the arm of the chair. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked. "The wastebasket, the cabinet." She thought about it honestly. "I wasn't sure they meant anything. Separately, they're small. Together, they're a pattern, but I needed more time to be certain. And now you're certain. Certain enough." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Most people in your position would have ignored it completely. Most people in my position aren't paying the right kind of attention." "What does that mean?" She looked at her hands on the notebook. "My father said it. He meant, there's attention you pay because it's polite, and attention you pay because you're interested, and then there's the other kind. The kind you pay because if you don't, something bad happens that you could have seen coming." She paused. He was an insurance adjuster. He was very good at it. Dominic was watching her with an expression she didn't have a name for. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was more like recognition. The look you give something when you identify it as being in the same category as yourself without having expected to find it there. "What happened to him?" he said. "Your father." She stiffened. Not dramatically, just the small involuntary tightening of someone who has said the same thing too many times and still hasn't gotten used to it. "Work accident," she said, "at a freight facility on the south side. He was 49. Dominic said nothing. The company said it was equipment failure. Inadequate safety protocols. He died at the scene. She kept her voice flat. Not because she felt nothing. Because she'd learned that flatness was the only way to say it without it opening up into something she couldn't close again. The settlement was eventually about 40% of what any lawyer we could afford said it should have been. His coworkers told us afterward that there'd been complaints about that specific equipment for over a year. Written complaints. Nothing was done. Dominic was very still. "When did this happen?" he asked. 22. "What facility?" She looked at him. "On the south side, I don't remember the exact name. Westlake something, or Westfield." She shook her head. "Why?" He was looking at her with that stillness again, the kind that wasn't peace. "Nothing," he said. "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you." He sounds like he was a careful man. He was the most careful man I've ever known, she said. Careful didn't protect him. She found out about Kara by accident. Dominic's younger sister arrived on a Wednesday afternoon without any notice Evelyn had been given, which was itself unusual because the household schedule was managed with a precision that felt almost compulsive. Every arrival, every departure, every delivery logged and anticipated. But Cara Valenti came through the front door at 3 in the afternoon with a duffel bag and an expression that said she'd been crying recently and had done a mediocre job of erasing the evidence of it. And she walked past Evelyn in the entryway with a "hey" that carried the weight of someone who had been coming through this door her whole life and had stopped noticing who was standing in it. She was 27. She had her brother's dark eyes and her mother's bone structure, and the particular quality of a person who has grown up inside a complicated family and learned to carry it as lightness, humor, deflection, the kind of social ease that looks like confidence until you see it up close. Evelyn brought her tea without being asked, because it was obvious she needed something, and tea was the thing Evelyn could provide without overstepping. Kara looked at the mug for a moment. Then she looked at Evelyn. "You're the one who's been here 2 years," she said. "Yes. Dom talks about you." Evelyn didn't know what to do with that. "I'll let you rest. He said you're the only person in this house who doesn't tell him what he wants to hear." Kara wrapped her hands around the mug. "That's either a compliment or a complaint. With him, it's hard to tell." Evelyn said nothing. She'd learned that silence was the correct response to most things Dominic adjacent. "He's in trouble," Kara said. Not dramatically, almost conversationally. "I mean, actually, not the usual kind." She looked at the window. "Victor Hale has been moving money. For years, I think. Dom's starting to figure it out. But Victor has been in this organization longer than Dom has been running it, and that means he has relationships Dom doesn't even know about." She pressed her lips together. "And he has something else. I don't know what. Something that can damage Dom specifically. Something from before." "Before what?" Evelyn asked. Kara looked at her. "Before my brother made the choices that kept this family alive." She paused. "Or at least that's what they told him they were. The choices." The room was quiet. Afternoon light moved across the wall. "Why are you telling me this?" Evelyn said. Kara was quiet for a moment, then, "Because Dom let you sit in his kitchen at 2 in the morning, and he hasn't let anyone do that since our mother died." She set down the mug. "That means something. From him. I just don't know if he knows it yet." He knew. He didn't know what to do with it, which was different, but he knew. It announced itself in the wrong moments, when she knocked on his office door to leave the weekly household accounts, and he looked up from his desk, and the thing that happened to his expression in the half-second before his professional mask engaged was something he wasn't fast enough to conceal entirely. When she came into the kitchen in the morning and he was already there, which happened 4 times in the week after their Sunday conversation, him at the table with coffee and documents spread out, and the particular hunched posture of someone who hasn't slept. And he looked up and his shoulders did something complicated. He was a man who had spent 22 years being looked at and not seen. The experience of being seen was, apparently, extremely loud even when nothing was said. He dealt with it the way he dealt with most uncomfortable truths. He generated more work. He was in the office 18 hours a day. He held meetings at 6 in the morning with people who clearly hadn't expected to be called at that hour. He moved through the house when he came home with the energy of a person who needs to always be in motion. Because stopping means thinking, and thinking means feeling, and feeling had no legitimate place in the schedule. Evelyn watched this and said nothing about it. What she said, on a Thursday night when she came downstairs for water at 11:30 and found him at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet and a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. "You know the coffee's still available." He looked up. His eyes were raw at the edges. He'd been at it for, she didn't know how long, long enough. "I know," he said. She made coffee, sat down. He went back to the spreadsheet. She opened her textbook. They stayed like that for an hour. Nobody explained anything. It was just a kitchen and 2 people in it and the specific quiet of late nights in houses where too much has happened. At some point he said, without looking up, "Did Kara talk to you?" "Yes." "I figured." A pause. "What did she say?" "That you're in trouble." "She's not wrong." He turned a page in whatever he was reading, turned it back. She's also not wrong that Victor has been here longer than I have, which means every countermeasure I've built into this organization." He stopped himself. "He helped you build them," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "I'm guessing," she said. "But if he's been your financial advisor for 19 years, you've probably asked his opinion on your security structures, which means he knows exactly where to move and where you won't think to look." Dominic set down his pen. "Harper." "Yes." "Where did you go to nursing school?" She stared at him. "What does that have to do with community college on the north side?" "Yes." "How long until you're certified?" 8 months. He picked up his pen again. "Okay," he said. She had no idea what okay meant in that context, and she wasn't going to ask. She went back to her textbook. He went back to his spreadsheet. The coffee went cold. She made more. The envelope arrived on a Friday. It was in her apartment. She had an apartment. The third-floor room was her address for the household, but she kept a studio 6 blocks away for the night she didn't stay, for her things, for the particular privacy of having somewhere that was hers and only hers. She went there on her days off, sometimes on evenings when the house felt too large and too full of its own weight. The envelope was on the floor inside the door when she got there. Slipped under. No stamp. No return address. Her name in the same black marker, the same all-caps hand, as whatever had been written on the photograph of herself she still didn't know about. She picked it up, opened it. Inside was a single index card. 4 words. "He can't protect you." She stood in her apartment doorway for a long time. The traffic outside was ordinary. A woman walked past on the sidewalk pushing a stroller. A bus went by. The world continued to be entirely uninterested in the index card in her hand. She thought about the filing cabinet, the wastebasket, Victor Hale's briefcase going out heavy when it came in empty. She thought about Kara's face when she said something that can damage Dom specifically. She thought about the men who came to the back door and the conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. She thought about, "I can't do this anymore in a wetsuit at 2 in the morning, and the mug rinsed and set on the drying rack, and the book open in a lap that wasn't being read." She put the index card back in the envelope, put the envelope in her bag, went back to the mansion. She found Dominic in the second-floor hallway at 9:30 at night, coming out of the office with his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled in the particular coiled tension of a man who has just confirmed something he was hoping to be wrong about. "I need to show you something," she said. She gave him the envelope. He opened it, read the card. His face went very still in a way that was entirely different from his usual stillness. Not control, not professional blankness, but something colder and more fundamental. The face of a man who has just understood that something he thought was contained has been given an address. "When did you get this?" he said. Very quiet. "Tonight. At my apartment." He raised his eyes to her. "Someone knows where you live." "Yes." A muscle moved in his jaw. He turned the card over in his hands, then handed it back to her. "I want you to move into the house. Full time. Starting tonight." "I'm not doing that." "Harper, if I run," she said, "whoever sent this knows it worked, and you lose the only person in this building who's been watching what Victor's been doing without him knowing it." He stared at her. Something moved through his expression, frustration, fear, and beneath both of those, something that looked, from where she was standing, a lot like respect and a lot like terror, braided together in a way he was clearly not comfortable with. "This isn't your fight," he said. "My father died in a freight facility on the south side," she said. "Victor Hale has been managing freight facility finances for 19 years. She held his eyes. "Tell me with certainty that there's no connection, and I'll step back." He couldn't. She watched him understand that he couldn't. Watched the certainty she'd seen growing in him over the past weeks. The certainty about Victor, about the money, about what had been happening inside his own organization for years, collide with the things she'd just placed in front of him, and the collision produced something that rearranged his face entirely. "What's the name of the facility?" she said. "The one my father died at. What do you know about it?" "I don't—" "Dominic." His name. She'd never used his name before. It came out before she'd decided to say it and sat between them like something dropped. He looked at her. "The Westfield facility on Halstead," he said. His voice was very low. "It was part of the Valenti freight network. In 2019, we had a string of OSHA violations at 3 sites. Victor handled the legal response. He negotiated the settlements. A pause. Each word coming out with the weight of something being lowered into the ground. I signed off on the settlement parameters. I didn't know the individual cases. I trusted his numbers. The hallway was very quiet. How many families? She said. He couldn't look at her. I don't know yet. I'm still pulling the records. But the discrepancies in the compensation claims. He stopped. The money that should have gone to those settlements went somewhere else. I can show you the gap in the numbers, but I haven't been able to trace where it went. She was very still. My father's name, she said, was James Harper. He filed a workers' compensation claim in August 2019. The settlement we received was $47,000. My mother's attorney said it should have been closer to $120,000. Her voice was completely flat. Find his file. Dominic pressed his eyes shut for 1 second, just one. Then he opened them and said, "Come with me." The records were in the second-floor office, not the filing cabinet, a separate system, a laptop connected to a server she'd never seen him use, accessed with 2 separate passwords and a physical key. He found it in 18 minutes. She watched him work, watched his hands move across the keyboard with the kind of precision that didn't allow for thinking about anything other than the task. And she understood that this was how he functioned in crisis. He narrowed, he focused, he moved through the problem with his hands. The file appeared on the screen. James Robert Harper, Westfield Distribution Center, Halstead, August 14th, 19. Injury to cervical spine and trauma to thoracic vertebrae following collapse of improperly secured shelving unit, rated for loads twice those being stored at the time. Internal safety inspection had flagged the unit 4 months prior. Documentation of flagging, present. Documentation of corrective action, also present, but fraudulent. The inspection had been signed off by a supervisor whose name appeared in 6 other fraudulent safety reports across 3 facilities. Recommended compensation per internal actuarial guidelines, $118,400. Settlement offered and accepted, $47,200. The difference, $71,200. Which had moved, she watched Dominic trace it through 2 shell accounts, to a holding company called Meridian Logistics Consulting, which had no employees, no physical address, and had paid out exactly that amount to a personal account registered to a person whose name she didn't recognize. But Dominic did. The way he said Victor, barely above a breath, the way you say something when your mouth knows it before your mind has caught up, told her everything. She was looking at the screen, at her father's name, at the number $71,200 in a column labeled Diverted Funds in a spreadsheet maintained by a man named Victor Hale, who had told her to bring anything unusual to him first. She was 31 years old. Her father had been dead for 6 years. She had worked 2 years in this house. She had 107 nights worth of a man watching her without her knowledge, and a kitchen conversation at 2 in the morning, and a cut on a lip and a bruised hand and a mug rinsed and set on the rack. She was looking at her father's name on a screen inside a mansion belonging to the organization that had killed him. How many others? She said. Dominic was scrolling. His jaw was set hard enough that she could see the muscle. I'm counting. He stopped, scrolled again. 40, he said, at minimum. 40 separate files with the same pattern. 40 families. 40 James Harpers. 40 sets of children who'd counted the money and found it wrong and hadn't known where to look. She put her hand on the edge of the desk. Not for support. Just to have something solid under her palm. I want copies of everything, she said. Harper, every file. My father's and the others. I want copies. She turns to look at him, because Victor Hale sent someone to my apartment, and the next thing he does won't be a note card. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. His face had moved past the professional mask, past the controlled stillness, past everything she'd seen on it before, into something she suspected very few people ever saw on Dominic Valenti: pure, undiluted accountability. The face of a man who has understood, in one specific moment, exactly what his choices have cost, and exactly who has been paying. I'll make you copies, he said. All of them. All of them. She nodded. She turned back to the screen. Her father's name, August 14th, 2019. She looked at it long enough to memorize every detail, which was longer than it took because she'd already memorized it on the first look, the way she memorized everything she needed to hold. Then she said, "Tell me everything about Victor Hale." And this time, Dominic did not hold back. Victor Hale had been with the Valenti organization since 1985. Dominic laid it out the way he laid out everything, methodically, without decoration, in the specific sequence that allowed the picture to assemble itself piece by piece rather than arriving all at once. He sat across from Evelyn at the office desk with the laptop between them and walked her through 19 years of financial architecture. The way a man walks through a building he's lived in so long, he's forgotten which walls he built and which ones were already there. Hale had come in under Dominic's father, Antonio Valenti, as a junior accountant at 26. He'd been brilliant at it, the kind of financial mind that could hold 60 variables simultaneously and produce a clean answer while maintaining 4 separate conversations. Antonio had promoted him 3 times in 8 years. By the time Dominic was 12, Victor Hale was eating Sunday dinner at the Valenti table twice a month and calling Antonio by his first name. When Antonio was shot leaving a warehouse on the west side in October 2004, Victor Hale was the man who drove 17-year-old Dominic to the hospital. He was the man who sat with him in the waiting room for 6 hours. I was the man who, 2 weeks later, sat across from the newly designated head of the Valenti organization and laid out with calm precision exactly what it would take to hold the family's interest together in the transition period, who needed to be paid, who needed to be called, which accounts had to move, and how quickly. Dominic had been 17 years old. He had understood approximately 40% of what Victor told him. He had trusted the rest completely. "He was my father's man," Dominic said. His voice hadn't changed in inflection or volume since he'd started talking. It was the flatness of someone who has been processing something for hours before being asked to speak about it. "I inherited him the same way I inherited everything else. The assumption was that he was loyal because he'd been loyal to my father." "Was he loyal to your father?" Evelyn asked. Dominic was quiet for a moment. "I used to think so." "And now?" He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a financial record, not the compensation files, a different one, older. She scanned it. It took her longer than him because she wasn't trained to read this format, but she'd been studying the household accounts for 2 years, and accounts were accounts. At some level, the logic was the same, and what she saw made her go very still. "This is from 2003, she said. "Yes." "A year before your father was killed." "Yes." She looked at the account numbers, the transfers, the shell company names that had an architectural similarity, the same invisible logic, to the shell companies in the worker compensation files she'd been reading for the past hour. Meridian Logistics Consulting appeared here too, younger, smaller, but present. Present and receiving money. "Victor was moving money before your father died," she said. "Yes." "And your father didn't know?" Dominic pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. It was the same gesture she'd seen the night he came to her door. The bruised hand, the gesture of a man trying to hold something in that keeps trying to get out. "I don't know yet. I don't know if my father found out. I don't know if that's—" He stopped. "If that's why he was killed," Evelyn finished. The room held that sentence. Outside, Chicago was doing what it always did. Traffic, sirens, the indifferent grind of a city that had seen too much to flinch at any particular secret. Inside the office, the laptop screen cast a blue-white light across Dominic's face, and he looked, in that light, younger than she'd ever seen him. He looked for just a moment like a 17-year-old in a hospital waiting room. "I need to be sure," he said. "Before I move on him, I have to be completely sure, because if I move too early, and he has copies of what he's been holding—" He stopped again, turned the laptop back toward himself. "What does he have on you?" Evelyn asked. He didn't answer immediately. "Dominic." He looked at her. He was still adjusting to his name in her voice. She could see it, the small recalibration each time, and she used it now with intention, because she needed him to understand she was asking the version of this question that required the true answer. "There are decisions I made," he said carefully, "in the first years after my father died. I was 17, 18, 19. I was running an organization I didn't understand yet with the help of a man I trusted completely. Some of those decisions, He exhaled. Some of those decisions were Victor's decisions, framed as mine, documented as mine, signed by me. He closed the laptop. He built a paper trail early. I didn't understand what he was doing until I was old enough to understand it, and by then the trail was 20 pages long. What kind of decisions? The kind, he said, that would end my ability to cooperate with federal authorities. Ever. About anything. He said it simply. Not with shame, exactly. With the specific exhaustion of someone who has carried a weight so long they've forgotten what their spine felt like without it. He made sure I was in deep enough that I couldn't come to anyone for help. Because if I did, I'd be handing them enough to put me away alongside him. Evelyn absorbed this. The room was very quiet. So he protected himself, she said, by making sure you couldn't protect yourself. Yes. For 19 years. Yes. She looked at the closed laptop. She thought about 40 files. She thought about $71,200 and her father's name and the shelving unit that 4 months of complaints had not produced a single corrective action on. She thought about a 17-year-old boy in a hospital waiting room being told he was the man of the family, now by a man who was already stealing from that family and had possibly arranged to be the only authority figure standing. He's been waiting, she said. Dominic looked at her. He's not escalating now because he's afraid you're getting close, she said. He's been waiting for a specific moment, something he can use, something that gives him maximum leverage, not just the historical paper trail, but something current, something that forces your hand right now. What would that look like? She thought about the index card. He can't protect you. A move against someone close to you, she said. Something that demonstrates he still has reach, that forces you to either react, which he can predict and control, or do nothing, which tells everyone around you that you're weak. She paused. He sent someone to my apartment. I know. That wasn't an accident, that was a message to you. Dominic's expression had been moving through something complex for the last 30 seconds. It settled now into something she recognized from his face in the kitchen 2 months ago. Not the controlled blankness, not the CEO performance, but the thing underneath. The real thing. Raw and tired and making no effort to be otherwise. He knows about the kitchen, Dominic said. He knows about the conversations. Whatever he has watching this house, it's not one person, it's a system, and it's been running longer than I've been watching him back. Evelyn thought about the wastebasket. The person who emptied it before she could, someone in this house who reported to Victor. Who has access to the 3rd floor? She said. He understood immediately. 2 people besides you, the cook and the overnight security rotation. He paused. The cook has been here 11 years. The security contracts rotate through an agency Victor selected. They looked at each other. I need to make a call, Dominic said. He made 4 calls. She heard pieces of them through the office door. Not the words, just the tone, which was the clipped, pressurized cadence of a man giving instructions in a code that didn't need to be explained because everyone receiving it already knew the language. When he came back into the office, his sleeves were still rolled and there was a quality to his movement, a controlled speed, that she recognized from watching athletes prepare for something they couldn't afford to lose. The security rotation is being replaced tonight, he said. The agency contract is being terminated. I'm bringing in people I trust personally. He looked at her. And I need you to not go back to your apartment. For how long? I don't know yet. A week, maybe more. She thought about Marcus, her textbooks, the routine she'd built carefully over 2 years to hold everything in its right place. My brother needs to know I'm all right. Call him. Don't tell him where you are or why. Tell him you're traveling for work. He'll know that's not true. Tell him anyway. She pressed her lips together. Then she took out her phone and called Marcus and told him she was traveling for work, which he received with the particular suspicious silence of a younger sibling who knows when they're being managed and has decided not to fight it tonight. When she put the phone down, Kara was in the doorway. She'd come up from the 2nd floor without either of them hearing her, which said something about how focused they'd both been. She was still in the clothes she'd arrived in, which meant she hadn't slept. Her dark eyes moved from Evelyn to Dominic and the distance between them and assembled a picture. Victor? She said. Yes, Dominic said. How bad? He told her. The short version, which was still long. Kara stood in the doorway and listened, and her face went through several things in succession. Shock, then a harder, colder version of shock, then something that settled in the jaw and the eyes into a fury that was quiet and absolute. When he finished, she said, "He was at Dad's funeral. He stood at the front. He put his hand on the casket. Nobody said anything to that." "How long before you can move on him?" she said. "I need one more thing," Dominic said. "I need the original document, the one that connects him directly to the order on Dad. Not circumstantially, not through 3 shell companies, but directly. Something that puts him in the chain of command on that decision." He looked at the laptop. "I think it's in Warehouse 7. Kara looked at him sharply. "Don't. It's where he keeps the physical records. I know he does because he told you," Kara said, 10 years ago. When you asked him where the long-term physical archives were stored, her voice had gone somewhere past fury into something flat and surgical, which means he's known, for 10 years, that you knew, and he hasn't moved them. She held her brother's eyes. "Dom, he's inviting you to go there." Dominic was quiet. "It's a trap," she said. "I know." "Then why?" "Because without the original document, everything I have is circumstantial." He stood up. "A good attorney pulls apart everything on that laptop in 48 hours. Victor knows this. He's counting on me knowing it too. He thinks I'll stay back. He thinks the paper trail he built 20 years ago means I'll never risk federal exposure by going to the authorities, which means I'm limited to other methods." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, which is exactly what he wants. He wants me to move on him the Valenti way, which he can document, which he can use, which locks both of us into a war of attrition. He's been preparing for longer than I've been watching him. "So you go to Warehouse 7, Kara said. "Alone. At night. Because that's better." "I go at 8 tomorrow morning. I take 2 people I trust. I go in, I get what's there, and I'm out in 20 minutes. And if there are people waiting for you." "There will be people waiting for me," Dominic said. "The question is which direction their loyalty runs when I walk in." Kara put her hand on the doorframe. She looked like she was holding the house up. "He's been building his own loyalties in your organization for 19 years, Dom. Some of those men have known Victor longer than they've known you." "I know. This could go wrong in 14 different ways." "I know that too." She looked at him. He looked back. The sibling silence between them was its own language, compressed by years and loss, and the particular shared history of 2 people who have been each other's only constant through everything else changing. Said, "No. Dom, you're staying here." He looked at Evelyn briefly, and then back at his sister. "Both of you. I need you both in this house." He left at 7:45 in the morning. Evelyn watched from the second-floor window. Not deliberately, she'd been passing, she told herself, as the car pulled out of the drive. It was a gray morning, the flat, colorless gray that settles over Chicago in spring like a tarp, and the car moved through it and disappeared around the corner, and the street was empty. Kara came to stand beside her. Neither of them said anything. At 8:00, Dominic's phone went to voicemail. At 8:17, it went to voicemail again. At 8:31, Kara called his driver directly. The driver, a man named Sal, who had driven for the Valenti family for 11 years, picked up on the second ring and said in a voice stripped completely of inflection, "He went in. I'm outside. He told me to wait." "Is he answering his phone?" Kara said. "No, ma'am." Kara pressed her lips together so hard they went white. "Stay on that door," she said. "Do not move." She hung up. She and Evelyn looked at each other. "He knew," Evelyn said. "Going in. He knew it was likely a trap, and he went anyway. He needed what's in there." "Kara," Evelyn kept her voice even, "if Victor has been planning this long, the document Dominic went in for might not be there," Kara said, "or might be there and be exactly what Victor wants him to find." Kara was already moving. She picked up her jacket from the chair where she'd dropped it. "If there's a document pointing directly at Victor for ordering Dad's death," she said, pulling it on, "there's also a document somewhere that points directly at Dom for something equally as bad. That's how Victor works. Mutual destruction. He shows you the gun he can put in your hand the same moment he shows you the gun he can use against you." She grabbed her keys. "If Dom finds something in there tonight and comes out swinging, Victor is ready to swing back. And whatever he swings with," she stopped at the door. "I need to be there." "We both need to be there," Evelyn said. Kara looked at her. A long look. The kind that evaluates. You sure about that? Evelyn thought about her father's name on a screen. $71,200. 40 families. She thought about the index card. She thought about the kitchen and the mug on the drying rack, and a man who had watched her for 107 nights without speaking because he was trying to understand, she thought, what it looked like to be a person who chose kindness without requiring anything in return. She thought about what he'd said in the library. I can't do this anymore. Get the car, she said. Bus some. Warehouse 7 was on the river. It was part of the Valenti freight network, legitimate on the surface, a functioning distribution hub for medical supply chains, staffed during business hours with people who had no reason to know what lived in the sub-basement behind the third firewall door. Evelyn had never been here. She'd processed invoices from this address for 2 years, had seen it in the accounts as a line item, as a logistics node. Seeing it in person was different. It was large, larger than she'd expected. The kind of building that has absorbed decades of use and doesn't apologize for any of it. Sal was outside where Kara had left him. He said nothing had come out. No movement at the main entrance in 41 minutes. Kara went in through a side door with a key she carried without explanation. Evelyn followed. Inside smelled of concrete and cardboard, and the cold mechanical smell of a building that processes things without caring what they are. They moved through the ground floor quickly, past rows of shelving stacked with palletized medical equipment, past a loading dock where nothing was loading, into a corridor that led to a freight elevator that Kara took without hesitation to the lower level. The sub-basement was lit with fluorescent strips that buzzed faintly. The air was different down here, set stiller, cooler, the air of a space that wasn't meant to be comfortable. Kara moved fast and Evelyn kept pace, and neither of them spoke. They heard voices before they saw the room. 2 voices. She recognized one immediately. Dominic. The other was older, measured, with the practiced ease of a man conducting a business meeting in a space he considers his own. Victor. Kara put her hand out and stopped. They were 10 feet from the open door of the archive room. Through the gap, Evelyn could see the edge of a metal shelving unit, the corner of a long table, and the side of Victor Hale's face. Silver hair, pocket square intact, standing with the absolute physical ease of a man who has been expecting this moment for years and is dressed appropriately for it. I wondered how long it would take you, Victor was saying. Sit down, Victor. Dominic's voice from somewhere she couldn't see. I don't think I will. The sound of paper being moved. You found the compensation files. I assumed you'd find them eventually. You're more patient than your father was. Antonio would have found them in 2011, I think, and reacted emotionally. You waited until you had enough that you felt safe. A pause. You don't feel safe, though, do you? I said sit down. I'm not going to sit down, Dominic. Kara moved toward the door. Evelyn grabbed her arm. Kara looked at her. Evelyn shook her head. They needed to hear this first. They needed to know what they were walking into. Kara's jaw was set like concrete, but she held. The document I thought you had, Dominic said. His voice had changed. Lower. Something in it that Evelyn had never heard before. The one linking you to my father's death. It's not here. No, Victor said pleasantly. It's not. A silence that had weight to it. Because there's nothing to link, Dominic said. Slowly. The realization arriving in his voice in real time, and it was terrible to hear, the sound of a certainty collapsing. You didn't order it. No, Victor said. I didn't. Then who? Your father ordered it himself. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Kara made a sound. Small, involuntary, the sound of a wound. Evelyn tightened her grip on her arm. Antonio found the early transfers in 2004, Victor said, and his voice was almost gentle now, the gentleness of a man who has been holding a blade behind his back for years and is finally bringing it into the light. He didn't tell you because you were 17 and he'd been protecting you from the operational details your entire life. He came to me directly. He told me what he'd found. He told me to stop or he'd expose everything, including the things that would have ended not just me, but the entire organization, the contracts, the political relationships, everything he'd spent 40 years building. A pause. I told him I would stop. I told him I needed 30 days to unwind the structures cleanly. And instead, Dominic said, instead, he was shot leaving Westfield facility 3 weeks later by a man he'd trusted for 15 years. A man I had a conversation with, yes, but a man who had his own reasons, his own grievances, his own. Victor moved somewhere in the room, his voice shifting angle. Your father wasn't a clean man, Dominic. You know this. The people who had reason to move against him were not a short list. But you gave them the moment, Dominic said. You told them where he'd be and when. I provided a logistical convenience, Victor said. Yes. Another silence. Then Dominic said with a quietness that was more frightening than anything she'd heard from him. The document I thought was here, the one you wanted me to find. There is a document, Victor confirmed, but it's not about your father. Something rustled. Paper. Pages. It's about the decisions you made in 2006 and 2007, the contracts you signed with the Meridian companies, the same companies you now know are mine, and the operational orders you authorized that, read without context, suggest you were a willing and knowing participant in a financial scheme that defrauded dozens of injured workers. A pause. And one federal transportation official, which elevates it considerably. Dominic said nothing. I've carried these for 18 years, Victor said, hoping I'd never need them. You've been a good leader in your way, careful, better than your father at the human side of it. But you started looking in the wrong places about 6 months ago, and then you... Another pause. You let a housemaid into your kitchen. Kara moved. Evelyn let her. They came through the door. Victor turned. He took in Kara first, then Evelyn, and his expression produced the smallest recalibration. Not surprise, something more precise than surprise. The adjustment of a man who has accounted for most variables and is now accounting for one more. Dominic was standing at the far end of the table. He had not touched Victor. He was holding a single piece of paper in his right hand and his left hand was at his side, and the way he was standing, shoulders back, completely still, weight distributed like a man who has decided exactly what he's prepared to do and is simply waiting for the right moment, was the most frightening thing in the room. He looked at Evelyn. She looked back. In his right hand, the document. In the room, Victor. In the sub-basement of Warehouse 7, 31 years of a man's constructed reality sitting on a table between two people, one of whom had built it and one of whom had been paying for it without knowing it. There are 6 men upstairs, Victor said, to the room in general. 3 of them have been with the organization for longer than Dominic has been running it. Their loyalty is... He tilted his head. Negotiable. In the current climate. How much? Kara said flatly. I'm not interested in money, Victor said. I have plenty of money. I'm interested in a conversation. He looked at Dominic. Give me what you've pulled from the server. All of it. The compensation files, the transfer records, the shell company documentation. Give me those and I'll give you what I have on you, and we go back to what we were. What we were, Dominic said. I run the numbers. You run the operations. We don't look too closely at each other's corners. You stole from 40 families. I borrowed from a fund that was already... You stole from 40 families. Dominic's voice had not risen. This was somehow worse than if it had. Including hers. He didn't look at Evelyn when he said it. His eyes stayed on Victor. Her father's name is in your files. James Harper, Westfield, 2019. You took $71,200 that should have gone to his family after he died in a facility your safety fraud allowed to remain unsafe for 18 months. Victor looked at Evelyn. She met his eyes and did not look away, and did not say anything. I see, Victor said. He looked back at Dominic. She's the reason you started looking. She's the reason I started seeing clearly, Dominic said, which is different. Victor was quiet for a moment. The professional pleasantness was still in his face, but something had shifted behind it. She could see it, the small recalibration happening in his eyes, as he moved through a calculation she couldn't fully read. The document in your hand, he said to Dominic, is not the only copy. Dominic said nothing. The 6 men upstairs, Victor continued, are not the only arrangement I've made. He reached into his jacket and placed a phone on the table. There is a federal agent. Her name is in my contacts. She has been receiving, not from me directly, through an intermediary, documents related to Valenti operations for the past 8 months. He left the phone on the table. She is expecting a call from me at 9 a.m. It is now 8:52. He looked at the watch on his wrist. If I don't call, the documents she's been receiving will be submitted formally as a criminal referral, your name specifically. He met Dominic's eyes. The documents you found last night will not be enough to counter what she already has, because what she has is signed by you, in your handwriting, with your personal authorization codes. The room had gone completely still. So, Victor said. He picked up the phone. Let's have a conversation. Evelyn was looking at the phone on the table. 8:52. 8 minutes. She was looking at Victor's hand on the phone, at the calm in his face, at the 19 years of preparation sitting in this room like something that had been growing in the dark and had finally grown large enough to fill the space entirely. She was looking at Dominic, who was holding a piece of paper that might cost him everything and had just been told that even that wasn't enough, and whose face had arrived somewhere she had never seen it before, past the controlled stillness, past the raw exhaustion of the kitchen, past the grief of the library, into something she could only describe as the precise moment when a person understands that they have run completely out of road. And she was thinking about 40 files, about her father's name, about the accounting records she'd been reading for 2 years, the household accounts, the logistics invoices, the quarterly numbers in her careful handwriting in the household notebook. She was thinking about the one thing in this room that Victor Hale had not accounted for. She pulled the notebook from her bag. She put the notebook on the table. Not dramatically, not with announcement. She set it down the way she set everything down, with the quiet precision of someone who understood that how you placed a thing communicated something about how certain you were of it. The notebook landed flat, cover up, and in the fluorescent buzz of the sub-basement archive room. It looked like what it was, a spiral-bound household accounting book, the kind you bought at any office supply store, its cover bent at one corner from 2 years of daily use. Victor looked at it. He looked at her. 8:53, Dominic said quietly. He was watching her. I know, she said. She opened the notebook. Not to the household accounts. Those were in the front section, the mundane weekly records of a large house running on schedule. She opened to the back section, the pages she'd been filling for the past 3 weeks, in the hours between midnight and 2 a.m. when the house was quiet and the numbers she'd been pulling from the Valenti server had needed somewhere organized to live. 41 columns, 41 names, dates, facility locations, original claim amounts, settled amounts, diverted amounts, destination account codes as far as she'd been able to trace them, and in the final column of each row, a number she'd calculated herself and triple-checked, the accumulated interest at standard legal judgment rates on each diverted amount across the years since diversion. Total at the bottom of the final column, 4.2 million. She turned the notebook to face Victor. He looked at it. His hand was still on the phone. His face was doing the thing it did when he was calculating. The small stillness behind the eyes, the micropause in his breathing. She watched him read. She watched him understand what he was reading. This is household accounting, he said. The last 40 pages are forensic accounting, she said. The methodology is in the margin notes. Every number is traceable to primary source documentation I have photographed and stored in 3 separate locations that are not this building and not the Valenti server. Victor looked up from the notebook. You've been doing this for 3 weeks. 22 days. You're a housemaid. I'm a nursing student with 2 years of household financial management and a father who was an insurance adjuster. She held his eyes. He taught me how numbers lie, and how they tell the truth whether they mean to or not. 8:54. Victor's thumb moved on the phone, not to dial, just the small reflexive movement of a man recalculating his position while trying not to show that he's recalculating. This doesn't change the federal referral, he said. No, she agreed, but it changes what the federal referral looks like. She put her finger on the total at the bottom of the page. Because this goes with it, all of it. Every name, every facility, every dollar traced to its destination. And when a federal agent receives a criminal referral on Dominic Valenti for organizational fraud, she also receives 41 documented cases of worker compensation theft, the methodology of the diversion scheme, and the name of the man who built it. She paused. Your name, Mr. Hale. In my handwriting, with 22 days of source documentation behind every digit. The room was very quiet. Victor looked at her for a long time. The professional pleasantness in his face was entirely gone now, stripped off the way a storm strips paint, and what was underneath was older and colder and looked, she thought, like the face of a man who had been managing other people's fear for so long that he'd forgotten he was capable of it himself until this moment. "You'd go down with him," Victor said. "You know that. You've been in this house. You've had access to these records. A prosecutor would— I'm a documented employee with a signed confidentiality agreement and a 2-year record of standard household management duties," Evelyn said. "What I've been doing for the past 22 days, I've been doing on my own time, with information provided to me by the organization's principal after he became aware of financial irregularities and sought assistance in documenting them. That's a witness, Mr. Hale, not a co-conspirator." 8:55. Victor's jaw moved. "You prepared for this?" "Yes." "You're not—" He stopped, started again. "You came here this morning." "I followed Kara here this morning," she said. "I brought the notebook because I always bring the notebook." Dominic was looking at her from across the table with an expression she couldn't fully read and wasn't going to try to read right now because right now she needed every available unit of attention on Victor Hale and the phone in his hand and the 4 minutes remaining on the clock. "Here's what I think," Evelyn said. She kept her voice level. Conversational, almost. The tone she used when she was explaining something to Marcus that she needed him to actually hear instead of react to. "I think you've been holding this position for 19 years because the mutual destruction scenario protected you completely. Any move against Dominic exposes you. Any move against you exposes Dominic. Perfect balance, perfect safety." She closed the notebook. "But the balance only works if Dominic has as much to lose as you do. And what I've been building for 22 days changes the math. Because now the documentation of what you've done is held by someone who has nothing to lose. Someone who isn't in your files. Someone whose father's name is in your files instead." She picked up the notebook. "So you can make that call at 9 o'clock. And what goes to your federal agent goes with documentation of everything you've done that she doesn't have yet. Or, Victor said. Or you hand Dominic what you have on him. Every copy, every file. And you walk out of this building, and the 41 families in this notebook receive the money they were owed, and whatever happens to you after that happens without my interference." Victor looked at her. At Dominic. At Kara, who was standing near the door with her arms crossed in the face of someone who has made a decision and is simply waiting for the world to catch up to it. He looked at the notebook. 8:56. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had changed. The certainty in it had a hairline fracture running through it she could hear clearly. "I never bluff with numbers," she said. "Ask anyone who's reviewed my household accounts." What happened next happened fast. Not the way movie moments happen fast. Not clean, not choreographed. It happened fast the way real things happen fast, with too much noise and too little warning, and the specific chaos of a situation that has been building pressure for 19 years finally finding a crack. Victor moved, not toward Evelyn, not toward Dominic, toward the shelving unit on the east wall, his hand going to something behind the third row of files that she didn't see clearly until it was in his hand. Not a weapon. A drive. A physical hard drive, small, matte black, the kind that held a lot in not much space. He held it up. "Everything on Dominic is on here," he said. "The copies on the federal agent server are clean. Nothing traceable to the transfer point. If this drive goes, there's nothing to corroborate the documents she has. They become allegations without a chain of custody." He looked at Dominic. "The offer on the table is still the offer. Walk away. All of us." Dominic crossed the room in 4 steps. Victor moved back. His shoulder hit the shelving unit and a row of binders came down, spilling paper across the floor. And in the confusion of falling files, Evelyn moved without thinking. Around the end of the table, between Victor and the door, because she understood before she'd consciously formed the thought that the door was what mattered. The door and what was behind it. The 6 men upstairs and the 9 o'clock deadline and the drive in Victor's hand. Kara was already at the door. Victor looked at the 2 of them, at Dominic, who had stopped 3 feet away, at the drive in his own hand, at the clock on the wall that read 8:57. "You have 3 minutes, Dominic said, and 1 move." Victor looked at him. Something moved through his face. Not the calculation this time, something older than calculation. Something that might have been, if it were anyone else, the recognition of being genuinely and completely cornered. "The men upstairs," he said. "Will hear from me in 3 minutes either way. Dominic said. The question is what I tell them. Some of those men would rather hear from me. Then call them. Dominic's voice was completely flat. Call them right now, and we'll find out together how many of them feel that way when I'm standing in the same room. Victor looked at him. The drive was in his right hand. His left hand was at his side. In the buzzing fluorescent light of the archive room, surrounded by decades of paper and the accumulated weight of a financial scheme that had run so long it had become architecture, Victor Hale looked, for the first time in Evelyn's experience of him, like what he actually was, an old man holding a hard drive and running out of time. He threw it. Not at Dominic, sideways, toward the far wall, the specific trajectory of someone trying to create a moment of distraction. Dominic moved for it. Victor went for the door. Kara hit him with her shoulder. Not a push, a full-body block. The kind that comes from someone who is smaller than you but angrier and moving faster and has committed completely. Victor went into the door frame. The breath came out of him audibly. He grabbed the frame, righted himself, and in the 2 seconds it took him to do that, Evelyn had picked up the drive from where it had bounced under the table and put it in her bag. Victor looked at her bag. "Give me that," he said. "No," she said. He took a step toward her. Dominic was behind him, moving. Victor checked over his shoulder, checked Evelyn, checked the door where Kara was now standing with her feet planted in a way that communicated she wasn't moving regardless of what happened next. 8:58. He looked at Evelyn. She met his eyes and held them. "My father's name," she said, "was James Harper. He woke up at 5:30 every morning for 31 years and went to work in buildings like this one because he believed that working hard and filing the right paperwork and following the right procedures meant something. He believed that systems meant something, that if you did the right thing would come back to you." She held the bag. "He died because you needed $71,200 more than he needed to live. And I have been in your employer's house for 2 years, making beds and managing accounts and studying nursing at midnight because that is what the right thing looks like from the other side of your paperwork." Her voice had not changed in pitch or volume. It was doing what it did when she had something to hold, going flat, going still, the way still water is deeper than it looks. "You don't get the drive," Victor breathed, in and out. His hand was on the doorframe. Then he turned to Dominic. "Call your men off." Dominic said nothing. "Whatever you think happens next." Victor's voice had lost its pleasantness, lost its professional ease, lost everything that had been decorating it for 19 years, and arrived at something that was just a man who had run out of room. "I still have the federal contact. I still have—" "You have 2 minutes," Dominic said, "and a choice." The 6 men came downstairs at 9:02. Dominic had called the one he trusted most, a man named Garrett, who had been with the organization for 12 years and who Evelyn had seen exactly once, in the foyer, delivering a message at 7 in the morning with the efficiency of someone who understood that the form of a thing mattered as much as the content. Garrett came down the stairs with the other 5 behind him and stopped in the doorway of the archive room and took in the scene. Victor against the wall, Dominic in the center of the room, Kara by the door, Evelyn with a bag over her shoulder and a notebook in her hand, and the specific expression of a person who has been awake for 27 consecutive hours and is not done yet. Garrett looked at Dominic. "Mr. Valenti." "Garrett." Dominic didn't move. "I need you to hear something," he told them. Not everything. Not the full 19 years, not the architecture of it. He told them the parts that were about the men in the room. He told them about the compensation files. He named facilities. He named dates. He named amounts. And as he spoke, Evelyn watched the faces of the 5 men standing behind Garrett, and she watched what happened in each face as the numbers connected to something personal. A shift in the eyes, a stillness in the jaw, the small, involuntary recalibration of a person who is hearing something that is rearranging what they thought they knew. The 3rd man from the left, heavy-set, gray, at the temples, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in physical work before moving into something else, made a sound at the 2019 dates. Just a sound. She couldn't identify it precisely, but it moved through the group. "Westfield," the man said, 2019. "Yes," Evelyn said. He looked at her. "My brother-in-law worked Westfield. He filed a comp claim after the shelf collapse. They offered him 40 cents on the dollar and told him it was standard." He looked at Victor. "He took it because his wife was pregnant. and he needed the money before the baby came. Victor said nothing. Is his file in there? The man said. I don't know his name, Evelyn said. But if he worked Westfield in 2019 and filed a claim, yes. He's in the notebook. The man looked at the notebook. Then he looked at Victor with an expression that was absolutely simple and absolutely irrevocable. He stepped to one side, away from Victor's side of the room, toward Dominic's. Two others moved with him, then a fourth. Slowly, with the deliberate weight of people who understand exactly what they're doing and have decided to do it anyway. Garrett hadn't moved. He was watching Victor. He told me this morning that you were moving against him, Garrett said to Dominic. He said you'd found something that didn't exist and you were going to use it to push him out. He paused. He asked me to make sure you didn't leave the building. The room went very still. Evelyn looked at Garrett's hands, both visible, both at his sides. And? Dominic said. Garrett was quiet for a moment. And I didn't know what to believe, so I came downstairs to look at the room. He looked at the archive shelves, the fallen binders, the paper scattered across the floor. He looked at Evelyn's notebook. He looked at Victor, who was still against the wall with the last of his professional composure assembled around him like a suit that had been through something it wasn't made for. I've been with this organization 12 years, Garrett said. My daughter was born the year I started. She starts high school in the fall. He looked at Dominic. I'm not going to make this harder than it already is. He stepped aside. Victor pushed off the wall. What happened in the next 8 seconds was not clean. He went for the door, and Garrett moved faster than his size suggested possible, and Victor's arm was behind him, and the sound it made when his shoulder hit the doorframe the second time was something Evelyn was going to hear for a long time. He didn't go down. He was 61 years old, and he was angry in the specific way of a man who has never, in his life, not had an exit, and the absence of one was producing something in him that was beyond strategy. He looked at Evelyn. Give me the drive, he said. His voice was stripped down to its absolute bottom. No pleasantness, no calculation. Just the raw request of a man who has one card left and knows it. No, she said. I will burn everything in this room. Then burn it, she said. The copies are in 3 locations that aren't this room. Burn this building to the ground and everything I have is still intact. He stared at her. His shoulder was bad. She could see it in how he was holding it, the angle wrong, the pain visible in the set of his mouth. She held his eyes without blinking, with the stillness she'd been practicing her whole adult life. The stillness her father had told her was her best thing. The ability to hold ground without making it a battle. To be simply, immovably present. She's telling the truth, Dominic said from behind her. Quiet, steady. She's been 3 steps ahead of this room since she walked into it. Victor looked at him. It's over, Victor, Dominic said. The word overlanded in the room with finality. Not dramatic, just true. Victor's shoulders dropped. Not a lot. Not dramatically. Just enough. The specific millimeters of a man releasing something he's been holding for longer than most people hold anything. The drive went to Dominic. The notebook stayed with Evelyn. Victor sat in a chair in the archive room with Garrett beside him and said, over the next 40 minutes, what needed to be said. Not everything, not voluntarily. But in response to Dominic's questions, which came in the flat, methodical sequence she recognized from the way he laid out everything he was certain of, patient, thorough, moving from established fact to established fact, until the next one couldn't be anything but the truth. Yes, he had diverted the compensation funds. Starting 2008, 41 separate files across 7 facilities. Yes, he had built the shell company infrastructure to receive the diverted funds. Yes, he had known about the safety violations at Westfield and 4 other facilities, and had allowed the legal response he managed to prioritize settlement minimization over remediation. Yes, he had information about the circumstances of Antonio Valenti's death that he had not disclosed. That last one was delivered in a different voice than the others. Quieter. With the particular quality of something that has been sealed for 20 years and released imperfectly, the way sealed things release. Not clean, not complete, but finally out of the dark. Antonio had confronted him. Victor had arranged the information about Antonio's schedule to be available to people who had wanted that information for reasons of their own. He had not pulled the trigger. He had not contracted the shooting. He used this phrase exactly, removed an obstacle to the obstacle. Dominic listened to this without moving. He listened to all of it without moving, standing at the end of the table, arms at his sides, completely still with the stillness that she now understood was not control but the opposite of control. The state of someone who has turned off everything that isn't essential, because everything that isn't essential would get in the way of what needs to happen next. When Victor finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Dominic said, "The federal agent you've been feeding documents to, her number is in your phone." "Yes." "Give Garrett the phone." Victor did. "You're going to call her," Dominic said, "and you're going to tell her what you've told me. Everything. With Garrett in the room and Evelyn's documentation as a supporting record." He paused. "And then whatever she does with it, she does." Victor looked at him. "You understand what happens to you if I understand what happens to me," Dominic said. "I've understood it since last night. I'm choosing it anyway." Victor was quiet. "My father—" Dominic stopped. Something moved through his face, something she had only ever seen traces of before. Deep and private and painful in the way that 22 years of unanswered questions produce pain. "My father spent his life building something. It turned out to be something he shouldn't have built. But he built it with his hands, and he died for it, and I've been running it since I was 17 without ever being given the choice of whether I wanted it." He looked at Victor directly, without the mask, without the blankness, without any of the performance of the man he'd been required to be. "I'm making a choice now. For the 41 families in that notebook. For what's left of what my father meant to build, before it became what it became." He held Victor's eyes. "Make the call." Evelyn was standing near the shelving unit with her bag over her shoulder and her notebook in her hands, and she was watching Dominic Valenti choose, in real time, to dismantle the thing that had defined him for 22 years in a fluorescent-lit archive room in a sub-basement on the river at 9:15 in the morning. She thought about the mug on the drying rack. She thought about, "I can't do this anymore." She thought about 107 nights and the courage it had taken to knock. The call connected. Victor's voice, finally stripped of everything it had been decorated with for decades, said, "Agent Morse, this is Victor Hale. I need to talk to you about the Valenti referral." A pause. "No. All of it. I need to tell you all of it." Evelyn closed her eyes for one breath. Just one. Felt her father's name in the notebook under her hands, felt the weight of 40 other names beside his. Then she opened her eyes, because she wasn't done yet, and there was work still to do, and she had never, in her life, left work unfinished. She looked at Dominic across the length of the room. He looked back at her. His face said, "I know. I know what I just did. I know what it costs." Her face said, "I know, I saw." And in the chair, Victor Hale's voice continued into the phone, low and confessional and 20 years past due, while around him the room held its breath and the river moved outside the walls, and somewhere in the city above them, 41 names waited without knowing they were being spoken for the first time. Dominic began to move toward her. He was halfway across the room when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. The number was one she'd never seen him react to before. Not a contact name, just an area code and a number, and what it did to his face was different from anything the morning had done to it. Different from Victor's confessions or Garrett's decision, or the weight of the call being made in the chair behind them. He looked at her. "It's a federal line," he said. His voice had changed again. "Not Morse. Different division." He held the phone. "If I answer this, everything that happens next happens in front of witnesses, every person in this room." "Then you have your witnesses," she said. He held her eyes for one moment, one long, specific moment that carried the weight of 107 nights, and 2 a.m. coffee, and her father's name, and the mug on the rack, and all the small accumulated evidence that two people can leave on each other without meaning to or knowing it's happening. He answered the phone. "Valenti," he said. She watched his face as he listened, watched it move through something she couldn't track from the outside, watched it arrive somewhere she recognized, the same place it had arrived in the hallway at 2 a.m., the place beneath all the performance, the place that was just a man. "Yes," he said into the phone. "Yes, I'll be there." A pause. "I'm bringing documentation." Another pause, shorter. "And a witness." He lowered the phone. "Federal prosecutor's office," he said. "They've been building something parallel, something that's been running longer than Victor's referral." He looked at his phone. They want to talk today. He put the phone in his pocket. About everything. The room was very still. Everything, Kara said from the doorway. Everything, he said. Evelyn tightened her grip on the notebook. She thought about the 8 months remaining in her nursing program. She thought about Marcus starting his last year. She thought about all the things she'd put on hold and all the things she'd already lost, and all the things that were still, barely, possible. She thought about a man crossing a room toward her who had stopped halfway and was now standing in the middle of it, holding a phone that had just changed everything again, looking at her with the expression of a man who has no more road behind him and has only just noticed there might be road ahead. Okay, she said. He almost smiled. Didn't quite get there, same as before, but close. I need to tell you something, he said, before we walk out of this building. She waited. The 107 nights, he said. I know you don't know what that means yet. He held her eyes. I'll explain it. After. When this is done and there's a kitchen and it's 2 a.m. and neither of us has anywhere else to be. He paused. If that's after, she said. Yes. He nodded. He picked up Victor Hale's files from the table. He picked up the drive. He looked around the room, at Garrett, at the men who had moved, at his sister in the doorway, at the scattered paper on the floor that represented 2 decades of a crime built inside a family's name. He looked at Evelyn. Let's go, he said. The federal prosecutor's office was on the 23rd floor of a building that looked exactly like every other federal building Evelyn had never been inside. Gray, efficient, stripped of anything that wasn't functional, as if the architecture itself was trying to communicate that sentiment had no jurisdiction here. She sat in a chair that was slightly too hard and slightly too low, and held her notebook in her lap, and watched the city through a window that needed cleaning, and thought about her father, who had sat in offices like this once, filling out claim forms, believing in the system the way people believe in things that have never yet failed them personally. The prosecutor's name was Claire Adler. She was 52, or somewhere in that range, with the specific kind of tiredness that belongs to people who have been doing important work for too long inside institutions that move slower than the problems they're trying to address. She had looked at Evelyn's notebook for 11 minutes without speaking. She had then looked at the Valenti server documentation for 23 minutes. She had then called someone, a name Evelyn didn't catch, and had a 4-minute conversation in the hallway with the door closed. When she came back in, she sat down across from Evelyn and Dominic and said, I've been building a case on the Valenti organization for 4 years. Dominic said nothing. The referral from Hale was useful, Adler said, parts of it, but it was also self-serving in ways that took us time to identify, because he'd structured it so that his own exposure was minimized while yours was maximized. She looked at Dominic. What you've brought me this morning changes the architecture considerably. How considerably? Dominic said. Hale goes away, she said simply. That's certain. The compensation fraud alone is federal. Multiple facilities, multiple states, spans more than a decade. The connection to the 2004 fatality, she paused. That's a different category. That takes time. How much time? Years. She said it without apology. I'm telling you that because I want you to know before you make the decision you're about to make. Dominic was quiet. The decision, he said. You brought me documentation of criminal operations across 19 years, Adler said. You brought me a witness whose documentation is clean and independently sourced, and whose personal connection to one of the victim families makes her effectively untouchable as a hostile witness. She folded her hands on the table. And you walked into this office voluntarily, which means you're not here to negotiate. You're here to make a statement about what you want to happen next. She looked at him. So tell me what you want. Dominic looked at the table for a moment, then at Evelyn, then at Adler. I want the 41 families made whole, he said. Every dollar that was diverted, with interest, from Valenti organizational assets. Not from a settlement fund, not from Hale's personal accounts, from the organization. From me. He paused. I want the safety violations at every Valenti-connected facility reviewed independently and remediated. I want that documented and verified. Another pause. And I want to cooperate fully with your investigation. Everything, every operation, every name, every account. He held her eyes. Whatever that costs me personally. Adler looked at him for a long moment. It will cost you considerably, she said. I know. The organization as it's currently structured won't exist in its current structure, he said. I know that too. The room was quiet. Outside, Chicago moved past the window, 23 floors below, doing what it always did, unconcerned. Adler looked at Evelyn. Ms. Harper, your testimony and documentation will be central to the compensation fraud case. You understand that means depositions, possibly a trial appearance, and a period of time, could be 18 months, could be longer, during which your life will be substantially disrupted. Yes, Evelyn said. And you're willing. She thought about 40 names in her notebook. She thought about the column of numbers in the final margin, $4.2 million, and the years of accumulated interest on stolen money. She thought about her father's face in the photograph on her desk, caught off guard, holding a paper plate, saying, "Stop pointing that thing at me, Evie." "Yes," she said. Victor Hale was arrested on a Thursday. Evelyn knew it had happened because Kara called her, not Dominic Kara, who had apparently decided that she and Evelyn were a unit in a way that didn't require anyone's permission or announcement. "They picked him up this morning," Kara said. "His attorney is already talking, which means Hale is talking too." A pause. "It's going to be loud for a while." It was loud for a while. The freight company's name appeared in news reports that Evelyn didn't read, in the same way she'd stopped reading certain things when her father died because reading them didn't change them, and it cost something every time. She knew what was happening from Dominic's face when he came home, which she could read now the way she'd learned to read the household, not from what it announced, but from what it withheld. He was selling properties. He was closing the accounts that needed to be closed. He was spending 8 to 10 hours a day in meetings with attorneys and federal representatives and financial compliance officers that left him looking, by evening, like a man who has been disassembled and reassembled and isn't entirely sure all the pieces went back in the right order. He was doing it anyway. She watched him do it the way she'd watched him for 2 years, quietly, without comment, from the appropriate distance. Except the distance was different now. Had been different since the archive room. There was no pretending otherwise. On a Tuesday evening in June, she brought coffee to the library where he was working and set it on the corner of the desk and started to leave, and he said, without looking up, "The Westfield claim." She stopped. "I went through the original procurement files," he said. I was still looking at the document in front of him. "For the shelving units that collapsed. The purchase orders were approved in 2017. Victor managed the vendor selection. The load rating discrepancy. The unit rated for half what was being stored on it. That was in the purchase specifications. Someone specified it deliberately." He set down his pen. "It wasn't negligence. It was built in." Evelyn stood in the library doorway. "Your father's death was not an accident," Dominic said. He looked up then. "I mean, I know you knew that on some level, the low settlement, the ignored complaints, but I wanted you to know that I know it, that I've documented it, that it's part of what Adler has." He held her eyes. "I wanted to say it to you directly." She stood there for a moment. "Thank you," she said. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. He knew it wasn't enough. But it was true, which was, she had learned, sometimes more valuable than sufficient. "The family payments start next month," he said. 41 checks. I'm having my attorney send them with a letter, explaining what happened and why." He paused. Would you want to read the letter before it goes?" She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I would." He nodded. He picked up his pen. Then he set it down again. "The stethoscope," he said. She waited. "I kept it," he said. "From med school. From the semester I started before my father died and I had to leave." He was looking at the desk. "I've had it in a box in the back of the closet in this house for 20 years. I don't know why I kept it. It seemed, I don't know, I couldn't throw it away." She didn't say anything. She understood the instinct completely. You kept the thing that represented the version of yourself that hadn't been lost yet. You kept it even when keeping it was a kind of cruelty. You kept it because throwing it away meant admitting that the life it pointed toward was definitively over. And some part of you refused to do that. Some part of you kept a small, stubborn light on in a room you'd locked and stopped entering. She understood this because she'd been doing it for 8 years with nursing school. "I'm finishing my program in October," she said. He looked up. "I deferred the last semester twice," she said. "I'm not deferring again." She held his eyes. Whatever the next 18 months look like with Adler's case, I'm finishing in October. I know, he said, as if it had never occurred to him it would be otherwise. She picked up her empty coffee mug from the corner of the desk. Drink yours before it gets cold, she said. He almost smiled. She left the library. In the hallway, she stopped and put one hand on the wall for a moment. Just that. Just the cool solidity of the plaster under her palm and the quiet house around her and the particular quality of a Tuesday evening in June when something enormous is happening very slowly and the only way to survive it is to keep moving through the ordinary things, the coffee, the accounts, the textbooks, the small daily acts of maintenance that hold a life together when everything else is shifting underneath it. She took her hand off the wall. She went upstairs. October came. She passed her certification exam on a Wednesday morning with a score that made the proctor look up from the sheet and then look at her and say, "Congratulations," with the specific inflection of someone who means it rather than performing it. She called Marcus from the parking lot outside the testing center. He picked up before the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting for it, which meant he'd known what this morning was, which meant he was still paying the right kind of attention even from 2 states away where he was finishing his own last year. "Well?" he said. "Finished," she said. The sound he made was not a word. It was the sound of a younger brother who watched his sister put something down for 8 years, and pick it up and put it down and pick it up again, and finally, carry it all the way to the end. She sat in the parking lot for a few minutes after they hung up. The October sky was the specific blue that only happens in fall in the Midwest, sharp and clean and almost painful to look at directly. She looked at it anyway. She thought about her father, who had wanted her to be a nurse since she was 12, and had told him she wanted to help people who were hurting. And he'd said, "That's the most useful thing a person can do, Evie. Remember that." She thought about the version of herself at 23 who had walked out of a hospital and sat on a bench and stopped, not because she didn't love it, but because loving it while carrying everything else had become impossible. She thought about what it meant that she'd gotten here anyway. Not cleanly, not without cost, not on the schedule she'd planned, but here. She started the car. She had a shift at the hospital in 4 hours, her first real shift, the beginning of the first week of the rest of the work she was going to spend her life doing. And she had, for the first time in 8 years, nowhere else to be that conflicted with it. The payments went out in November. 41 envelopes, 41 letters, 41 checks drawn on the Valenti organizational accounts. The amounts calculated from Evelyn's notebook with the legal interest applied, reviewed by Adler's office, and approved as part of the cooperation agreement. Dominic signed each check himself. He did not have his attorney sign them. He sat at the library desk for 3 hours on a Saturday morning and signed all 41. She knew this because she brought him coffee twice during those 3 hours and saw the stack diminishing each time. The letter was 2 pages. She had read it before it went out. He had written it himself, not his attorney, not a communications consultant, him, in the specific direct language of a man who had decided that the form of an apology mattered as much as its content. It described what had happened. It described what had been hidden and for how long. It used the word inexcusable once in the second paragraph, without qualifications around it. It described what was being done and what would continue to be done. It did not ask for forgiveness. It did not suggest that the money repaid what had been taken, because money cannot repay what had been taken. It said that clearly. Evelyn had read it standing at the library desk while Dominic sat in the chair by the window. When she finished, she set it down. She had said, "The third paragraph, where you describe the safety review process. Add that it will be independently audited annually and that the audit results will be shared with the affected families." He had looked at her. "They deserve to know it's ongoing," she said, "not just fixed once." He had added the sentence. The responses started coming in December. Not all of them. Some of the families didn't respond, which was their right, which was understandable in a way that required no explanation. But some did. Letters, mostly. A few phone calls routed through the attorneys. One family, a woman whose husband had been injured at a facility in Indiana in 2015, whose settlement had been reduced by Victor's scheme by just under $60,000, wrote 3 pages, handwritten, that arrived addressed to Evelyn specifically because her name had appeared in the accompanying documentation as the person who had compiled and verified the original records. Evelyn read the letter at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, which was where she still read things, late at night, with good coffee, in the house that had stopped being just a place she worked and become something else that she didn't have a clean word for yet. She put the letter down when she finished. Dominic was across the table. He'd come in an hour ago, same as he did several nights a week now. Not by design, or not by announced design, just by the accumulated logic of two people who had discovered that the kitchen at 2 in the morning was where they both made the most sense. A woman named Patricia Okafor, Evelyn said. Her husband Marcus, same name as my brother, I noticed that, was injured in 2015. They have 3 kids. The oldest started college last year on a partial scholarship. She looked at the letter. She says in the letter that she assumed for 9 years that the low settlement was just how it worked, that she'd never thought to question it. She says, she stopped. The flatness she used for things that mattered was working hard right now. She says she's glad someone was paying the right kind of attention. The kitchen was quiet. Dominic reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not a dramatic gesture, not a performance. The simple physical weight of a hand placed with intention on another hand. He didn't say anything. She turned her hand over. They sat like that for a while. Victor Hale pled guilty in February. Not to everything. The negotiation took 4 months and produced a result that Adler described to Evelyn as adequate given the available evidence and the timeline involved, which translated, Evelyn understood, to, it wasn't everything, it was something. It was what the system could actually deliver, rather than what justice in its purest form would have required. He received 14 years on the fraud charges. The connection to Antonio Valenti's death remained, in the end, in the category of things that were known but not provable to criminal standard. The man Victor had arranged the information for had died in 2017, and the chain of evidence was documented but fragile, and Adler had made the call to take the certain conviction rather than risk the whole case on the shakier charge. Dominic had sat in Adler's office when she told him this, and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, just that." Evelyn had been beside him. She had watched him absorb it. The knowledge that his father's death would never be fully accounted for in any courtroom, that the closest thing to justice available was a man going to prison for money he'd stolen while the larger crime remained in the unresolvable category. She had watched him sit with that and not fall apart, not rage, not perform any of the reactions that the situation might have warranted. He had put on his coat. He had thanked Adler. He had walked to the elevator. In the elevator, going down, he had said, "My father wasn't a good man." She had looked at him. "He wasn't a bad man either," he said. "He was complicated. He built something that hurt people, and he also loved his family, and he made decisions I wouldn't have made, and he would have made decisions I made that he wouldn't have. He was a person." The elevator descended. "I've spent 22 years trying to figure out what I owe him and what I owe myself and what the difference is. I still don't have a clean answer." "Most things don't have clean answers," she said. "No." He looked at the elevator doors. "But I know this. Whatever I owe him, I've paid it. The years of running what he built because there was no one else. The cost of being what the organization needed me to be." He paused. "I've paid that. I'm done paying it." The elevator opened. They walked out into the February cold, into a Chicago afternoon that was gray and sharp and indifferent, and she thought, this is what the other side looks like. Not triumphant, not clean, not the resolution of a story where everyone gets exactly what they deserve. Just the other side. Where you are when you've gone through something and survived it, and the ordinary world is still there, still doing what it does, waiting for you to decide what you're going to do in it now. The Valenti Freight Company became Valor Logistics in the spring. The rebranding was less about the name and more about what the name signified. The legal restructuring, the compliance framework, the new board with independent oversight, the contracts with hospital systems renegotiated under terms that were clean in ways they hadn't been before. It still moved medical supplies. It still ran long-haul routes across 12 states. It still employed over 1,000 people, most of whom had been there before and stayed because the work was good and the new structure was, if anything, more stable than the old one. Dominic kept his office on the 42nd floor. He changed his title to president and brought in a CEO from outside the organization. A woman named Torres, who had spent 15 years rebuilding supply chain operations for healthcare nonprofits, and who had, when approached, asked 14 questions before she agreed to the interview, all 14 of which Dominic had answered with complete honesty. He told Evelyn this over dinner, at the kitchen table, because they had started eating dinner there on the nights her hospital shifts ended early enough, and his meetings ended early enough, and the city wasn't pulling in opposite directions, which was 3 or 4 nights a week, and had stopped requiring planning and started requiring only the small mutual acknowledgement that both of them were home. She asked if the culture was salvageable, Dominic said. Torres. In the interview. What did you say? I said I didn't know. I said I thought the people were salvageable and the operations were salvageable, and that culture was built by people doing operations in a particular way over time, so maybe that was the same answer. He turned his fork in his hand. She said that was the most honest response she'd gotten to that question in 20 years of working with organizations in transition. Did you hire her because of that? I hired her because she's better at this than I am, he said, and because she's not afraid of me, which is rarer than it should be. Evelyn looked at him. Are most people afraid of you? He thought about it. They were, he said. Less now. I'm not sure if that's the circumstances or if I've become actually less frightening. He paused. Kara says I smile more. She said it like it was suspicious. Evelyn laughed. It surprised her. Not that she laughed, but the quality of it, the ease of it, the way it came out, without any of the careful management she'd applied to most of her emotional responses for the past several years. It was just a laugh. In a kitchen. Over dinner. He was looking at her when she came back from it. His face had the expression she'd learned to recognize as the one that lived beneath everything else. Not the CEO, not the careful man, not the Valenti heir. Just him. Whatever that was. Still figuring out its shape after 22 years of being something else. October 7th, he said. She looked at him. Your certification exam, he said. You passed on October 7th, at 9:43 in the morning. He held her eyes. I know because you texted Kara, and she told me before you'd put your phone down. I wondered how you knew before I got home, she said. I've been paying the right kind of attention, he said, for a long time. She looked at him across the kitchen table. The house was quiet around them. Somewhere outside, the city did what the city did. The kitchen clock counted its seconds with the same patience it had been counting them for as long as the house stood. The stethoscope, she said. He looked up. You said you kept it, she said. The one from your first semester. Yes. Where is it? He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up and left the kitchen. She heard him on the stairs, heard the familiar sounds of the third floor, the floor that creaked at the landing, the radiator that still ticked at irregular intervals, the particular acoustic quality of a house that had absorbed too much history to be entirely quiet even when no one was moving through it. He was gone for 4 minutes. He came back with a stethoscope. It was old, not antique, just old, the kind of old that comes from being put away for 22 years in a box at the back of a closet. The chess piece was tarnished at the edges. The tubing was slightly stiff with age. He set it on the kitchen table between them. She looked at it, then she looked at him. Keep it out of the box, she said. He looked at the stethoscope, at the table, at the kitchen that had been the most honest room in his house for as long as he'd lived in it. He picked it up, held it in both hands in the way of someone who is reacquainting themselves with the weight of something they'd thought they'd given up the right to hold. Okay, he said. Dad. He asked her to marry him on a Sunday morning in May. Not with ceremony, not with a ring in a restaurant or a plan that had been coordinated with Kara, though Kara found out within the hour, and her response was both immediate and characteristically excessive. He asked her in the kitchen because the kitchen was where they were, because the kitchen was where they had always been most honest, because the kitchen at 2 in the morning had been the beginning of everything. And the kitchen on a Sunday morning in May seemed like a reasonable place for whatever this was. She'd been reading patient files. She did her chart review at the kitchen table now, the nursing paperwork spread out beside whatever he was working on, the two of them in the comfortable parallel industry of people who have learned to share a space without requiring it to be organized around any single one of them. He had set down what he was reading. He had looked at her. She had looked up. He said, I want to marry you. Not as... He stopped. Started again. Not as the man this city knows. Not as the Valenti organization or the CEO or whatever comes after. As the man who knocked on your door at 2 in the morning because he had no one else and no language for what he needed, and you made coffee and let him sit in your kitchen until he could breathe again. He held her eyes. That man. I want to marry you as that man. She put down the patient file. She looked at him for a long moment. At the kitchen around them, which was just a kitchen. Old counters, the window above the sink, the clock on the wall, the coffee maker that was hers because she'd brought her own beans, and the habit had simply continued. She looked at the stethoscope on the shelf above the counter, where it had been since he'd taken it out of the box, available to be seen every morning. She looked at the man across the table who had knocked on her door 107 nights into watching her and spent 22 years being something he hadn't chosen, and was still, in the May morning light, figuring out what he was allowed to be instead. Yes, she said. She asked him, later, about the number. They were in the kitchen, where else? And it was 2 in the morning, when else? And she was reviewing patient files from her shift, and he was beside her with his coffee and the particular quality of lateness that had always, for both of them, been when they were most awake. 107 nights, she said. He looked up. You said you'd tell me. After. She looked at him. We're after. He was quiet for a moment. He set down his mug. He looked at the window above the sink, at the dark yard, at nothing in particular. The first night I noticed you, he said, you were in the garden. It was late, almost midnight. You had your nursing textbook, and you'd taken it outside because the radiator on your floor was making noise and you couldn't concentrate. He paused. You were studying under the garden light and a moth kept hitting the lamp, and you kept redirecting it with your hand, not swatting it, just redirecting it, away from the light. He looked at her. You did it 17 times. I counted. She said nothing. I didn't know why I was watching, he said. I didn't know for a long time what I was watching for. I only knew that every night I could see the light in your window from certain rooms in the house, or hear you in the kitchen at midnight when I came in late, or see you in the garden, and whatever I was carrying from the day, the meetings, the decisions, the weight of being what I was, it was lighter. He held his coffee mug. That sounds… No, she said. Keep going. On the 107th night, I was coming back from the meeting I told you about, the one I couldn't sign off on, the one that made me understand I couldn't keep doing it. I came through the gate and your light was on, and I stood in the garden for I don't know how long, and I thought, there is one person in this house who does not want anything from me, who is not afraid of me, who is not here for what the Valenti name means or provides. He paused. Who keeps moths away from lights at midnight because it's the right thing to do. Evelyn looked at her patient file, then at him. And that's when you knocked. That's when I knocked, he said. The kitchen clock moved, the coffee steamed. Outside, the city breathed in the particular low register of a night deep enough that even Chicago had wound down to something close to quiet. She reached across the table and put her hand on his. He turned his hand over. They stayed like that, in the kitchen, in the 2 o'clock dark, for a long time after the coffee went cold. True strength, like her father had said something like this once, in the way he said things, obliquely, not knowing she was filing it away. He'd been talking about something else entirely, some account he was working, some claim that had been mishandled, and he'd said, the thing people don't understand, Evie, is that paying attention is an act of love. It's the most consistent act of love there is. Anyone can show up for the big moments. The people worth keeping are the ones who notice the small ones. She'd been 16. She hadn't fully understood it. She understood it now. On the shelf above the counter, the stethoscope caught the kitchen light. On the table, 40 patient files waited for the morning. Outside, the city moved through the last hours of the night with the particular indifference that was also, if you paid the right kind of attention, a kind of freedom. The freedom of a world that does not require you to be what you were, that continues without demanding explanation, that offers the small, ordinary fact of another morning as if it were not, each time, the most extraordinary thing imaginable. The light burned in the kitchen. 2 people sat at a table with cold coffee and good work, and all the long, complicated years behind them, finally, quiet. And somewhere in 41 houses across Chicago and Indiana and the South Side and places Evelyn had never been, and names she now knew by heart, 41 families slept through a night that was, by one small increment, less weighted than the night before. Not fixed, not erased, but lighter, by exactly the amount that attention, paid honestly, can lift.